threatened Tri-County health officials with shooting and a civil war if they didn't lift stay-home orders. We've learned it's not his only threat toward public officials, and the man behind the threats tells me he's just trying to warn them of consequences. I'll talk with Vice President Pence about the rising threats of violence over public health orders, along with the slow pace of testing and the reason why the administration doesn't want America voting the way that Colorado does. Encouraging news is coming out of our state's hospitals, including a way to track COVID-19 that hasn't gotten much notice. Rush hour's returning. There's a sure sign of reopening. And beer, delicious beer, being dumped out to start a second life in northern Colorado. All that is next. The man who threatened Tri-County public health officials with shooting and a civil war also threatened a Broomfield City Council member, telling her to be careful that people were going to shoot elected officials over the stay-home orders. Police tell me both of those threats were not specific enough to be a crime. The man behind the threats tells me he's sending warning signals. End the lockdown now or face severe consequences. The email Tuesday led police to increase security around the Tri-County Health Department. The emailer warned of a civil war. I tracked down the man who sent the email. We're identifying him only by his first name, Brian, because he hasn't been charged with a crime. He texted me to say that he was just making them aware of possible consequences from other people. Brian also emailed Broomfield City Councilwoman Heidi Henkel last week, writing, "I've heard through the grapevine that folks with guns are talking about shooting elected officials. Keep that in mind and be a little careful when you drive to and from work, school, or other places." Henkel says she increased security at her home as a result. Broomfield police say that threat isn't specific enough to be a crime. Same for the Tri-County Health Department threat. Brian told me that government officials may be more responsive after they receive his threats. Unable to stop him, both police departments told me they will only monitor the situation. Let's talk about mental health. Perhaps we just were. The sheer number of calls for help these days indicates the extent of Colorado's current mental health crisis. Here's Nusha Roy.
When you compare March of 2020 to March of 2019, the Colorado Crisis Services saw a 47% increase in the number of people reaching out for help, a jump from more than 13,000 calls, texts, and chats in a month to 20,000.
People feel cut off from their support system.
A majority were COVID-related, from people looking for help with things like anxiety and depression. And while the Department of Health says they haven't seen an increase in suicides this year, both the state and Vincent Achety with Mental Health Colorado says it's too soon to draw any conclusion.
That data is got a significant delay built into it because it comes county by county.
The governor said one of his goals moving into the safer at home phase is to minimize secondary health effects like the impact of isolation and loneliness. It's why the state is also making sure the resources it has now can handle more people reaching out for help.
We are anticipating that we will see some sort of delays in sort of the immediate crisis, and then a few months down the road, people are going to recognize that impact that this has all had on everyone.
At Denver Health, they've also seen more people reach out for outpatient care, but it's the decrease in the emergency room that has Dr. Christian Thurston worried.
The number of people going to an emergency department with suicidal thoughts has really decreased since the pandemic started. But I really don't take much comfort in that, because what that's showing me is that people are not reaching out for help. They're afraid to go to the hospital.
And Dr. Thurston wants people to know help is available.
Well, Denver Health, at least is not overwhelmed with patients right now.
The Colorado Crisis Services line is available 24/7. The state is picking back up a marketing campaign because they want as many people as possible to know about this. And specifically at Denver Health, Kyle, they're also expanding both their outpatient and inpatient behavioral health help just to make sure that they have the capacity and the ability to help anyone who needs it.
And Nusha, I think so often we think about the people who are in need of assistance in some way or another, or the people who are able to render help, but the experts say those things are really kind of connected sometimes.
Yeah, they actually have a name for it, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's called the pulling together effect. It's what's happening when you help each other out, support each other, when as a community, we're all going through something really difficult. So that little donation that you made, the signs we've been seeing around town, Dr. Thurston says that has a very real impact in protecting each other's mental health. So a small act of kindness, you don't really know how far it's going to go for someone who sees it.
All right. Thank you, Anusha. We have thrown a lot of charts and numbers at you over the last couple of weeks. I would ask you to look at one more. This one is real important. Our Chris Vanderveen is going to explain why hospitals think that one daily count that they do gives us vital early warning about coming cases.
Those looking for good news need look no further than Colorado's hospitals. For weeks now, patients once very ill have left. Hundreds of patients.
So we're just in a lot better shape than we were 4 weeks ago.
Dr. Stephen Cobb says back then Centura's hospitals were admitting up to 6 patients a day. Now, seldom more than 5 total. The state's own graph shows March and April's spike is come and gone. But there's even better news than this. The state also tracks what it calls persons under investigation, or PUIs for short. Basically, patients hospitals believe have COVID, but have yet to receive a positive test result. This number is down too. PUIs are important because in a hospital, they're treated as if they have COVID and thus carry all the same labor-intensive precautions with them. Now let's look at what happens when you add positive cases to PUIs. The curve, that downward curve, is even more pronounced. Will it last long term?
I think most healthcare believers believe we're going to see another wave and maybe another wave after that.
Dr. Cobb says he'll know if and when the next wave is coming by looking at this line.
I think you're right, Chris, in just looking at the number of hospitalizations. It's a better number as we start increasing the populations we test.
For now, things are good, much better than early April. The hope is this continues, but should it not, you now know one data point to keep a close eye on. For Next, this is Chris Vanderveen.
That encouraging trend is one of the main reasons that hospitals now feel comfortable doing elective surgeries once again. America's COVID-19 testing started painfully slow and continues to lag behind goals. Our analysis found that in the first 48 days of testing, we averaged roughly 40 tests a day nationwide. Yet Vice President Pence was out promising 4.5 million tests by the middle of March. I spoke with the Vice President today and began by asking whether the administration's testing promises were misleading.
The truth is we had an old system. There may have been a lot of tests out there, but the ability for public state labs or for the CDC to process those tests was very slow, very arcane. But when the president brought those vast commercial labs to bear, like have been doing tens of thousands of tests in Colorado, it changed the game.
Police have increased protection for public health officials outside of Denver after a threat of shooting and a civil war if they didn't lift public health orders. The FBI arrested a man in northern Colorado. They say he had pipe bombs. He'd been bragging online about his weapons and talking about going to a reopened Colorado rally. I know we've all seen those images of armed protesters outside and inside state capitals. Are you concerned about the threat of violence from Americans who are angry about the public health orders?
Well, I must tell you that the American people know that America works when America's working. And I think that's why the people of Colorado have welcomed Governor Jared Polis's efforts to begin to reopen portions of your economy. And as people exercise their First Amendment rights and express a desire to have their states go back to work, I truly do believe that they're doing so in the best spirit of this country.
Mr. Vice President, in our short time remaining, a question about voting by mail. Republicans and Democrats in Colorado have run secure and fair mail-in elections here. The president has said that voting by mail, as both he and you have done, is ripe for widespread voter fraud. Our former Republican Secretary of State went looking for that voter fraud and couldn't find it here. So why fight this safer way for people to vote?
Well, elections, as you know, are governed on a state-by-state level all across America. And there are instances, there certainly were in the state of Indiana, of fraud involving absentee ballots and absentee voting, and there have been prosecutions in the last election for that. I think the president just wants to make sure that we always protect that sacred right of one person, one vote in America.
You can see my full unedited conversation with the Vice President on the next YouTube channel. On this Throwback Thursday, we take you way, way back to Monday, when Frontier Airlines CEO came on next to unveil their new upgrade, $39 to hold the seat next to you empty during a pandemic. The idea lasted 2 days. Who could have seen that coming? Everybody, actually.
So Frontier's model, the low-cost model, is the a la carte model where people pay for various perks and this and that, and you're allowing people to pay to have an empty seat next to them. Are you asking people to pay for safety?
No, so we actually believe, as I said a moment ago, that you're safe on Frontier as long as you're wearing a mask and everyone else is, plus all the cleaning procedures and everything else we've done. But we do recognize that we've had a lot of people ask us to guarantee if we could have a seat open next to them. And even prior to this, we were looking at adding this option just for people who wanted more space. So no, you're not paying for safety. We believe you're safe on Frontier. But if you'd like a little bit more peace of mind and a little more space, we're going to offer that option.
So Congress had the same concern as everybody, and Frontier abandoned that plan under pressure from Congress last night, said that it was not trying to profit from safety. And today, the airline rolled out a plan for temperature checks for all passengers and crew starting in June.
Most of the metro area is still supposed to be staying home. So what's up with rush hour coming back already? And this is not a state that wastes beer.
And they had reached out to us seeing if farmers could use it in ways that are more creative than just getting their animals drunk.
I'd like to see an alpaca after a couple of IPAs, but that's not what's happening in Fort Collins. Next.
Kendrick Castillo. I say his name and I hope that many, many of you instantly think of bravery, selflessness, and courage. It has been 1 year since Kendrick Castillo laid down his life protecting his classmates from a school shooter. Kendrick lunged at the shooter inside his classroom at STEM School Highlands Ranch, and he was shot and killed that day. He's 18 years old. Today, Kendrick would have been completing his first year in college studying engineering. Instead, his parents, John and Maria, and the family dog gathered at his gravesite. They reflected on their loss and what life would be like if Kendrick was still here.
He comes out here and he actually knows Kendrick's site. He'll go over and lay down there, and that's how I'd get up Kendrick for school. It's like, Kona, come on, let's get up Kendrick, and he'd run and jump on him. So now he goes to his room, but of course, Kendrick's not there. But I keep thinking, what would he have done? He probably would have been working on or have an idea about how to help with this COVID situation that we're in, or the Mars rover, or what the future might be. And we lost that. And I hope people feel my pain and they do the right thing.
Castillos have been very open about their grief, and Colorado's promise in return has been that we will always remember their son. Colorado's highways, they're one measure of how the state's getting moving again. Gone are the empty interstates of 2 weeks ago. Even with most of the metro area still under a stay-home order, our Mark Salinger noticed the highways are filling up again.
If you judge a city by its traffic, Denver is starting to look like itself again.
Ever since we've moved to the safer at home, we have seen some more cars out on the roadway.
At the beginning of April, CDOT says traffic volume across the state was down about 50% from pre-COVID times. Even though most counties in the Denver metro area still have stay-at-home orders in place, traffic on the roads has increased about 20% in the past week since the state's order expired.
We've been seeing traffic steadily increase. Crashes are starting to go back up.
Michael Brumbaugh sees it every day. He's a motorcycle officer with the Arvada Police Department.
I think people are getting back to work in certain circumstances, as well as just kind of being tired of being at home.
Let's look at traffic on I-25. In April of 2019, more than 259,000 cars passed through on an average Monday. On April 13th of this year, in the middle of the statewide stay-at-home order, the number of cars dropped to just over 122,000. On April 27th, the day the statewide order expired, traffic increased to nearly 180,000 cars.
We did see a lot less cars on the road, but then we started to see an increase in speeds, and that was something that disturbed us.
CSP says even with fewer cars on the road this past month, the number of crashes remained about the same. Now they're preparing for what will happen when people used to speeding on empty roads meet increased traffic. For Next, I'm Mark Salinger.
CSP says it's seen the same number of crashes this year, but they're more serious. Motorcycle deaths are up 25% this year.
Most craft beers they're better fresh.
Yet they're not useless once they're stale, so long as you're creative.
And I guess it's better to go to a use than no use.
We'll pour one out for the beers that never had a chance. Next.
Lemons into lemonade is the cliche. The lemons for Colorado's breweries is beer that's too old to safely sell. And you can't turn that into lemonade. But one brewery in Fort Collins is turning it into compost.
The year looked great. Of course, mid-March, everything came to a screeching halt overnight. I'm Carol Cochran, and my husband Tim and I own Horse and Dragon Brewing Company. Every single bar and restaurant partner that we work with has at least one keg of beer. By the time they are allowed to reopen and serve, won't probably be the best representation of our product. Even the beer that we have here, we're working on now, finding a way to dispose of that, hopefully in a beneficial manner. Generally what you would do is treat that beer to bring it to within the EPA guidelines and then put it down the drain. It sucks a lot.
And they had reached out to us seeing if farmers could use it in ways that are more creative than just getting their animals drunk.
Alex and his partner Mary run Folks Farm and Seed.
So I immediately got on my computer and was like, oh, what can we do with a bunch of beer? I saw some things about inoculating compost piles.
The soil scientists at CSU did say, oh, that's true, inoculating, they call it inoculating compost with beer. The microbes in the compost love it. Not only can we work with people like Alex and Folks Farm and Compost Queen, and there's a community gardens that we've visited and put some beer on their compost, but also we can do that on our home compost pile, you know, a keg's worth.
They have put their hearts and souls into this product, and now they're like having to watch it hopefully go through a stage of rebirth.
It's painful, you know, but it's better than putting it down the drain with chemicals in it.
I just wanted to help them as best we could. And I love when communities do develop and we can find avenues for resources that would otherwise be considered waste.
It's better to go to a use than no use.
That story came to us through the lens of our photojournalist Mike Grady. Horse and Dragon's doing like a lot of breweries. They're pivoting to canning their beer so they can sell that in liquor stores and hope that that revenue will be enough to hold them over until bars and restaurants reopen. I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. The greatest mask of all is next. While your aunt is busy sharing nutty coronavirus memes on Facebook, we are seeing Coloradans of all ages embrace the simple idea of wearing a mask to provide some form of protection to yourself and others. Even Coloradans in the womb. Deborah in Westminster was sewing masks to give away when she decided to make one for her neighbor Sarah, as well as Sarah's baby bump. Sarah gave birth to baby Lilu on April 13th. Mom and baby are doing well. Steve says interview with the Vice President was a one-sided and controlled conversation. That it was, Steve. I control the questions. He controls his answers. Dee says you should ditch this cow town and go work for CNN. I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult. See you next time.